Hello and welcome to What the Luxe with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. Look, I'm delighted for this episode of What the Luxe to have Matteo, who's the CMO of VistaJet. And we've spoken about doing this podcast for some time, but
yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, we're both all over the
We're
place
too busy.
the whole time. You're too busy. If ever there was a flightier-footed man, it is you. But I'm not surprised because you've been so busy. I was reading some of your great articles that you've been doing for Forbes, which are really interesting. Plus, I'm sure that working for a company like Vista involves what I would hope getting on those jets and enjoy having a bit of enjoyment.
I think the nicest part of the job is the people you meet. The crowd that tends to fly in private jet is normally pretty successful, and they're successful for a reason. So it's a constantly humbling experience to meet clients and people who could be your prospective clients and just ask them questions. They normally know so much more than you, and it's so enriching.
In my very limited experience of this, I would say that, there's a strata of wealth where people tend to be incredibly humble. And to be that successful, you have to stay fresh, keep your thinking fresh. In order to keep your thinking fresh, you have to be inquisitive, ask questions. You have to repeatedly demonstrate that you can manage others in a way that draws out their best qualities. And you probably have to have a pretty strong sense of your own strengths and when to step in, but also when to step away.
That's pretty accurate. The people that are at that level of success and leaders of the world, ultimately, tend to get there out of their intentions. It's never by chance. And that requires an incredible discipline, talent, of course, bit of luck, but more than anything, being kind to the people around you. Because you cannot get to a place unless you have a good team around you and people that trust you and people that understands what you want. And if you don't take the time to speak with these people, to transmit your thoughts and make them understand where you're trying to go, of course, that will not happen. You can't do it on your own. There's no way on earth that you can do it on your own to that level. The life becomes very, very complex. They're managing gigantic macroorganism, business ventures or countries. You're not an individual anymore. You're part of a system you have built. And if you lose the goal, if you lose the target, nothing will stay together. So you are the leader in the sense that you are trying to make something very hard come together and become a reality by managing all the talents you have around you and just repeating yourself. And repeating it and keeping it clear and keeping it simple for the people around you, which is basically what you try to do in marketing, right? You're trying to stop people on the street from doing something or excite them with something, and you just have to make it simple for them to absorb it, to see it.
There's something interesting there, actually, because obviously marketing tends to kind of bracket all high net worth individuals into just this soup and just assume that everyone's the same and, just exists in this frankly wealth demographic that perhaps few of the people servicing that wealth demographic actually understand.
I think that was my biggest surprise coming from fashion, because in fashion we have very clear targeting. Anyone making more than X a year can afford my fragrance, can afford a jacket, can afford a luxury restaurant. The reality is here we're talking of a segment that is the 100 million plus. So you're looking at 300,000 people across the entire world. Start dividing that by 200 different nationalities. That's already quite a big mix. Then you put it from 25 to 90 years old. Basically, you have a person per segment. It's as diverse a segment as it could be. And if you want to have scale in the world of private jets and business aviation, well, then you need to speak a completely different language. And is the language of, I think, respect and personalization. And you need to be able to listen to every one of your customers as if they were the only customer.
Do you think that it's almost like a sort of global culture, the ultra elite
There's some elements that bring them together. Of course, you can have Indian heritage, Italian heritage, I don't know, Saudi heritage or South African heritage. That, of course, will be 50% of who you are, your culture, where you grew in, etc. Then there is the heritage of performance, which is normally something that they do have in common. There is a tendency to be people of action and people who actually have that mindset. So the way they approach the world is quite similar. They have a leadership style, of course, so that is in common. The most common thing is that they can all choose something else. So that is the attribute that I'm trying to, with the team, we try to work more with, is what can I do that makes them think that is the choice today, that is the right choice today, and maybe it's better than what I have already. So when the price point or the money is not an issue, how do you conquer somebody and convince them to change from what they already thought was the best to what you have to offer? It's not easy. They tend to be pretty clear in the mind of what they want.
I would just imagine that the requirement for flexibility in the schedule of someone who's simultaneously managing God knows how many ventures, is extreme. And, I would imagine that places a huge demand on yourselves. I mean, I inquired about a VistaJet before this, just to test it out. I spoke to one of the people who works for you, very, very polite, as you can imagine.
As you would expect, yeah.
And, it's sort of based on a quote, and there's a little bit of a couple of days of lead time. I would imagine when you're a member, it's much more, it's like concierge,
So what typically happens is if you're a member, we guarantee a flight available for you in as little as 24 hours. That is based
to anywhere?
Yeah, on the local regulation. So in some countries, you might have 2 days to require a permit, and that, of course, is 2 days. But for us, in terms of organizing the flight, planning the flight, and moving the aircraft to pick you up, that's 24 hours. Every day, you schedule where each one of the aircraft will go. And each and every flight is different. You don't know, as of today, where all the aircraft will be in 2 days' time. So you need to arrange for permits, for fuel, for the crew, for the hotel rooms for the crew, for the taxis, for the availability of cars for your clients, full-on catering from Michelin star restaurants, etc., all in those 24 hours, 300 times a day.
I mean, this sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It's not a nightmare. It's very exciting.
That's framing it, and I'll put it another way. There's a certain type of mind that can cope with the logistical processes that must exist in the back end.
There's two elements there. First, you build the network. So you build, again, you can't do it alone, right? So we have, for example, just on the catering, 7,000 partners.
It's unbelievable.
So 7,000 food partners that have all been trained on how to create the dishes, how to deliver them for quality, how to deliver them for the safety, and they create instructions for our cabin crew on how to replate and prepare for the customers every single dish with pictures and instructions. The same is true for fuel. The same is true for cars. The same is true for anything special you want on your aircraft. You say, I would like to have just this soft drinks that I really like. Well, there's going to be somebody from the plane or from a local caterer, etc., that 2 hours before your flight is out searching for it and bringing it on the fly. Because if you are one of our crew members today, you don't know where you will be tomorrow. In the evening, you receive your call and it says, tomorrow you get on the plane and you go to. And it could be Siberia, it could be Sahara.
What's the general kind of like macro changes in sort of private aviation or semi-private aviation or like the Uberization of flying?
There's several items here to unpack. There's been a big change during COVID. During the pandemic, of course, a lot of the people who never used to fly private have started trying private. If you were going London to New York, you don't need to fly private. You have a flight every 20 minutes, right? So majority of people were saying, you know what, it's absolutely fine. And they started flying private. And they realized that the gigantic difference that if you can afford it, the system has. You said it before, it's the flexibility, it's the speed, it's the time saved, it's the quality of the flight itself because you're relaxed inside the cabin. You can command the time inside the cabin. You can do what you want inside the cabin. And at arrival, you're fresh instead of being tired, right?
It's just that there's just an element there that I feel is really important, which is the airport experience itself is so broken. I almost was going to ask this side question that maybe I should have reserved for later instead of interrupting you, but it's almost like, do you find you're competing almost with private terminal suites in some regards, or is that just...
Private terminals are another strange environment. If you think that a train station is a strange place, or if you think that an airport is a strange place, try an FBO. An FBO is the place where nobody wants to be, because you are paying to get with your car straight under the airplane and just go up and leave, right? If you are in an FBO, which is a fixed-based operator, so basically it's small terminals where you refuel. That was the initial purpose of an FBO, was they would refuel for you, making sure that all the safety and security is in place, etc., before you take off. It normally means that there's a problem with your plane. So the FBO is a place where everyone wants to go, in principle, because it means you're flying private, but you never want to stay in the FBO because that means it defeats the purpose. Exactly because the airport should be a transit space, not a place to stay. Now, the commercial experience has been transformed by transforming them into shopping malls. They are a shopping mall because there's a lot of operations that happen in the background that require you to wait. And so they're trying to make it more fun and more entertaining. An FBO, the large majority are pretty simple spaces with a room where if you are a bit early, you can stay, a scanner for x-rays and checking your luggage, etc., and a person who checks your passports. That's about it. So exactly as you were saying, the point of a private airport is to disappear. So if you were today to start working for a private aviation company or a business aviation company, what would be your first question?
I mean, I would try and understand, firstly, the business model and where really the margin comes from and where the key costs come from, because it's operationally complex, right? So you have to carry the weight of a lot of costs. Presumably, they're not a variable cost, but like they're basically fixed costs. And so I would try and really understand like the dynamics and like how the pricing dynamics are impacted by like, I don't know, do you know what I mean? Like what's the equation?
So the equation is very simple in a way. You have the high cost is the metal, is the machines, right? Imagine our fleet is all super mid and large. So we're looking at 8-seaters to 15-seaters, 5 hours flight to 17 hours flight. Each one of these goes from 30 million to 75 million per aircraft. So you're looking at a substantial investment in the asset itself. And the business model is exactly one where you are trying to reduce the cost for the client by increasing the utilization of your asset. So instead of you owning your own aircraft and flying it 200 hours a year, we fly it 1,000 hours a year. So immediately the cost of the acquisition of the assets is divided by 5. So we can reduce your cost per hour because, of course, we can distribute the cost of acquiring the asset, credit for it, etc., and the repayment on the lease across many more hours. So that is point number one. Of course, there are prices that you cannot really do much about, which are the lending fees, taxes, and fuel. You can do negotiations of fuel based on scale, of course, because we are the largest on-demand provider in the world. Of course, we have economies of scale on our purchasing deals. But the reality is that a lot of the airports are individually owned. So you do individual deals. And then you have your cost of crew are pretty much fixed. We all have similar costs for that. Where you get the big advantage of flying with VistaJet is exactly the fact that you are not acquiring the asset yourself. And compared to a charter market where the price goes up and down every single day, they call it dynamic pricing or real-time pricing. When you become a member of VistaJet, you have a fixed rate every day of the year. So if you want to leave tomorrow, you don't need to question what is going to cost me because you've already negotiated that and that it stays the same for 3 years. So that is the simplicity we try to bring in. Otherwise, if you go on the charter market, you have to negotiate every single flight based on age of the aircraft, experience of the crew, what you ask as additional services, etc. And that can take weeks.
Sorry, so just to reiterate that point, you have pre-negotiated cost per hour.
Yes.
Okay, and do you have to analyze the client's kind of unique?
Yes, every contract is bespoke.
Yeah. So you're basically, I guess, looking at things like level of flexibility required, like typical destinations, quality of how big the group size is, size of the aircraft, maybe like other like secondary or tertiary requirements.
Well, consider it, when you buy an Apple computer, you go in and you can select the top of the range, and then you say, actually, I don't need this, I don't need this, I don't need this, etc. So we normally start from the maximum price. We showcase the maximum price to a client and say, no questions asked, this is the price. But of course, if you start flying always from key hubs, we can consider a discount because we know that we're going to have somebody to pick up after you land, and it doesn't create an extra flight. If we know that you're flying mostly off-peak, we can try to negotiate a better deal. If we know that you can be flexible sometimes, and maybe we can arrange 2 flights in a day instead of 1, of course, we have an advantage in terms of being able to use the aircraft twice, etc., and we're happy to pass on the savings. So it's a very transparent model where we allow the client to choose what they need, but once it's done, it's done. You negotiate once, and then for 3 years, you don't need to question it anymore. It was one of my first surprises coming into private aviation after fashion, was that it's a world that wants to save a few hours on every flight. But if you go to the charter market, it can take you weeks to negotiate a flight. We are all used at booking a flight in 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, if you really take your time. And private aviation, which is the promise of being there immediately, etc., is actually the opposite, because you need to negotiate every single item because you need to build your own flight.
You're pretty prolific in the world of luxury, bump into you almost everywhere. And you write and you teach, and you've had a very interesting career that has been, a journey through fashion into aviation. And you've got a pretty broad perspective on luxury. I think you mentioned earlier when we were talking, you were saying, it's a very different world of luxury now to the world that we had before. And there's a theme that you've written about as well. First, just talk through your journey that you've been on. Maybe the first question I should have asked rather than one midway through. And then secondly, what are the big changes and shifts that you've seen in the world of luxury over your tenure?
I started working in luxury by chance. I started working in luxury because I am a student of semiotics. I studied semiotics with Umberto Eco in Bologna, and my keen interest has always been meaning, how meaning is generated, how culture happens, how do we share values, how do we share ideas, how do we attribute meaning to things. So the fascination for me with the world of brands and luxury started exactly that way. My final essay at university was on Gucci. I spent 6 months there studying the whole corporate identity and how Tom Ford was transforming everything. I was there when he was just appointed creative director. And that is what got me into luxury, because it's the place where you can really dedicate time to create a brand culture and the significance of a brand. It's something that seems like it's been reinvented yesterday by the Louis Vuitton of the world, right? They talk about brands as a cultural object. It's always been the case. Brands are part of our lives, and they define us because they have a definition of themselves that we want to appropriate and want to make our own, right? And part of our identity. So to me, the interest is always into people and how to use object and cultural construct, such as brands, to define their life, to define their relationships, to define their view of themselves, etc. So that is my general take on the world of marketing. And what I like is that with marketing, you can change the way people see things, from a commodity to a desirable object. Water is something that goes through a river. When you put it into a bottle and you put an Evian logo on it, is not the same object, right? And then the interest for me is when you go into fashion, it's so visceral. People have this deep attachment to, oh, this is incredible and this is absolutely something I would never wear or something that I would never acquire because that's not who I am, right? So the element of identity is really pushed into the fashion and luxury world. When I came into private aviation, that was after like 15 years in fashion, and I wanted to discover new objects, new things that are part of lives. I've had quite a lot of exposure into the world of luxury itself. I've been doing trunk shows for Bottega Veneta, and I was with Paul Smith when he was opening museum exhibitions with artists and doing design collaborations, etc. So I've seen quite a bit of how you create an object to start adding layers of significance to it that go beyond the functionality, whether it is by the design, so its 3D aspects, if you wish, or its design aspect, or whether it is through the use and the perception of the user while using it. If it is behavioral, I've done a lot of retail, and how do people interact with a space? Do they stay a second longer? Do they take a decision instead of another? Do they move to the till? Do they ask for an extra question that then allows you to actually upsell and present a product that is not immediately evident and transform that into something desirable? Coming into the world of private aviation for me was all about, okay, now I have people that have all the time in the world. They can choose whatever they want. In reality, they are time poor and bombarded by too many choices. What is the key there? And the key there was to become the only option. So how can we create a brand that is the first port of call for everyone who wants to have the best product? Because they are used to always having the best product. And that was the challenge. And that was what was fascinating me. Now, if we look at more the university or article side, etc., that to me is a way to reflect. Because at work, of course, you're always running 100 miles an hour. You deliver a lot, etc., and you need a pause sometimes. So being in front of a class, university, whether it's Monaco, Milan, Harvard, Switzerland, forces you to put your thoughts in order. And then you learn something by doing that. It's not just a practitioner anymore, but you need to take a step back and say, let's observe what I've done. And normally you learn a lot about what you have forgotten, and you learn a lot about the gaps you left. So it's a good way to familiarize yourself with what you already know, but you're not aware you know, and also identify the gaps.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. I definitely come out of any class I've taught having learned definitely probably more than any of the poor people who've been subject to it. Yeah. I mean, it really forces you to just reflect, actually, on the things that you've become complacent that you know because you're desensitized to them, And I like what you were saying earlier about retail and thinking about, the gesture or the mannerisms in store and the opportunities or gaps to upsell and store design and ambience and all of these aspects that, again, often are quite intuitive, but do at a certain point need to be deconstructed into like a level of science, because it is nuanced and it is subtle. And those cues are the difference between $1 million here or there. Frankly, if you just shortcut the equation into the commercial upside, but also the joy of getting there, right? And often these things are, because we're a very creatively led world, they can be very intuitive. But the problem with intuition on its own is that you can be buffeted by the intuition of various creative voices, and the sum total is a lack of consistency, and it's a lack of consistency that ultimately destroys value. And so sometimes I do think those things need to be codified, and I think it's very important to do so.
There's two streams into what you're saying. The first one is how do you disentangle or recognize how entangled they are, rationality and emotion, right? Which is a very difficult line to run through. You always need a rational benefit. Everyone likes to be reminded that we are rational animals and beings. Although the reality is that the decision-making process happens before, based on your perception schemes, and after, based on your confirmation schemes and the sensory reflection on what has been a rational act, right? So you absorb and make your behavior into a habit if it has generated some positive feelings or a sense of that was the right way to do things. So this is one big topic. So this second item you're talking about is consistency. And consistency, I think the risk is falling back into the marketing funnel, right? There your awareness, consideration, purchase. and post-purchase. The reality is that we are getting into a world where I remember a slide from Google at the Business School of Economics just a year ago. This professor comes in, and I think I never laughed as much, and was saying, I spent 2 years with Google trying to analyze all the possible combination and configuration of the choice and the decision tree, right? And eventually said, I think I cracked it. And he showed up, and it was an arrow going in, an entire mess in the middle, and then something coming out. I said, it's absolutely impossible. We looked at all the data we have. There is not a single pattern you can really identify. It's been a myth from all the marketing books.
AI won't become sentient then.
No, absolutely not. It's absolutely impossible. So that was his way. So what is consistency for? When you work in luxury, you are leaping into the world of trust. It's not a commodity anymore. You're attributing value to things that you do not really comprehend to the T, because the level of complexity of a luxury product in terms of heritage, in terms of competencies, in terms of sourcing of materials, in terms of design values and aesthetically cultural values, etc., is very, very complex to disentangle. So you are believing that the price you're paying is worth it. And that is where you take a leap of faith. So do you need consistency or do you need trust? That is a very different thing. Consistency can be a repetition of the same item over and over and say it's a guarantee of a promise, etc. Trust is, I don't even need to check on you. You can do whatever you want, but I will get into a point where the price you command, I know it's worth it, right? And then it's not price anymore, it's just value.
Okay, so Matteo, should we talk about VistaJet for a moment? What's the kind of like mission? What's the like key offering? This is all in the wrong order, isn't it? Because this should have come second. But let's talk about. I think it's a really interesting proposition, and I think it's such a like fertile opportunity, because it is so obviously a bad decision, in my opinion, to own a jet, unless maybe you're Elon Musk, and then you make funny pictures of your flight path.
VistaJet is born out of frustration and mistakes. Like most good products, I would say. Is somebody who was a user. The founder, Thomas Flohr, was a user first. Then he went into buying his first jet, realized it made a massive mistake, started chartering it out. People liked his jet, and he said, they don't want our jet. They like my jet. So if I were to buy another one, I would do it exactly the same. And he started renting it out and renting the second one as well. And he said, okay, maybe there is something here. Maybe they like that combination of the style, the interior, the livery, the service, and what I'm doing with it. What would be the next step? Well, the next step would be to be able to offer it anytime and anywhere, because then it removes all the complexities of having multiple providers and every time having to find somebody that can rent your jet. And so he built the scale. And then he said, what is the next thing that I can kill? Well, nobody likes to pay for repositioning flights. I only want to pay for the hours I use it. And that's what we did. Removed all the repositioning flights costs around the world, because when you are a global player, it doesn't matter whether you land in Dubai or in Manila or in New York. You will find somebody that departs from that country the next day to go somewhere else. And then when you get there, you have another client that will pick it up to go somewhere else. So that was another big deal. And then he said simplicity, because I spent so many hours on the phone and negotiating those deals that I want one price. And after that, I'm done. I just decide tomorrow I need a plane. Tomorrow I don't need a plane. That is the only thing I want to have to think about.
What changes have you noticed in like the kind of high net worth profile? I'm kind of loath to say this, seeing as we've spent about 5 minutes talking about how that's not a classification that serves its audience particularly well. But what are the key changes you've seen?
The main reality is the way to spend the time has changed a lot. And also the way who you want to spend your time with has changed a lot. If you look at the 70s, the 80s, there was much more of a community vibe, and you wanted to go to a place because of a tribe that was sitting there, etc. I think in the last few years, we noticed that people tend to stick with their own. So you want to go with your own group of friends a lot more. So I think the element of the private tours, private guides, private residencies, etc., versus the big resort, the famous city, the big concert, etc., has become a thing of trying to do things with the people you like and sharing moments with the people you love. So that is definitely influencing how people use private aviation, etc. It's also to stick together and to create that moment where we can concentrate on each other. There is an increased sense of value time spent together.
I think there's like something to be said about finding those moments in motion as an almost sort of meditative experience. I think like I secretly looked forward to not having Wi-Fi on flights, for many reasons, or like get through a whole book, or like, you get a bit cozy, where, how you might be traveling. It certainly wasn't private in my case. And now I'm like a little bit like pissed off, frankly, that I can like access, what will soon be Starlink, grade internet on my flight, and I travel a lot, and those are my moments of solace, and I enjoy almost being at airports and kind of just people watching and just having time to myself to listen to things. And I know a lot of people share the same thing.
It's important. It's a moment you reconnect with yourself. I mean, if you think about our biology, your brain learns as you sleep because it processes everything that it has absorbed during the day. Your muscles recuperate, regenerate, etc. while you're resting. If your brain is constantly on, if your body is constantly on, etc., you simply don't have time to absorb things and make them part of your body, of your brain, and you never make them yours, right? So you're a user. You're not an experienced person at that point. And that, I think, is what people want. They don't want to just do. They want to be good at doing. And that requires time and patience and dedication. And we're kind of told left and right that you can do it in 3 simple steps. Sometimes, but sometimes you really need to dedicate a bit of time to develop that craft, to really understand what is under it. And to your point again, right, it's this is what luxury is promising you. 200 years of doing the same thing and passing on that knowledge. So if you're investing in something from the luxury world, that is what you're buying.
What excites you within the travel space, or what like kind of innovation in the travel space do you think is interesting?
I'm quite interested into seeing how hotels are becoming destinations themselves, because they're not just rooms anymore. They are becoming meaningful spaces where you go to do something and learn something. Of course, there's a lot of copycat still, but they are really refining the atmospheres, the feelings they generate, etc., and how they connect with the cities they're hosted in or the countryside, etc. So I think there is a new sense of hospitality that is going back to, I want to know the host. I want to know why I should be doing something, and I want to believe that my time here is not just a comfortable bed, right? Again, it's coming out of the commodity aspect and making it into the enriching world. And I think that is exciting because the hospitality world had not changed for a long time. It was just expanding, and going into the pampering, right? And so it was just softer. It was comfort. It was led by comfort. It was not led by learning. And so that is an exciting bit.
Thread count, not value exchange.
Exactly. And the other interesting thing is the paradigm transformation of how to travel, all the sustainable options, and looking how a resort can actually be part of the structure and the tissue of a local community or of a natural environment, etc. That is very interesting to me as well. I'm a kid of the 90s, right? That is where I woke up into seeing the world around me and not just being self-centered as a teenager. And travel was always the moment of globalization for me. It was the years where globalization was the big word, right? We're going global. We're becoming all one, and we all learn the same thing. We're all going to be equal. And then it went into homogenization. And now McDonald's everywhere. And now we're all buying the same things, and we're losing our roots, etc. And this was the 2000s, right? So the negativity around what globalization is also comported. And now we're going back into another world where is the pride of each country and the pride of each nation and the pride of each tribe of retaining the uniqueness, etc. So I think it's only through travel that you can go around and meet the people and try to understand how do they live today and what they're yearning for. We will never end. We'll always go through cycles of integration, cycles of wishes, a cycle of protection, cycles of being proud of what you have and what you stand for. So I'm just curious of the new meaning of travel. For many people was taking a picture in front of the Colosseum. For other people is becoming going to find the special ingredients for a recipe they've always wanted, or the story that their grandmother was telling. So it's becoming much more fragmented, and I think that again means that we can all find our own way to travel. And that is why I love the fact that the hospitality industry is changing from a generally good comfort level of just different price levels into, no, it's more about the personality of the travel.
What's your stance on sustainability? Now, I'll footnote the question by saying you can only own an aspect of sustainability that you can own, right? So what is your position on VistaJet's approach to holding its corner for whatever aspect of sustainability it chooses to?
Let's start from the understanding that private aviation is an infrastructure for transport. It serves a purpose which is not fulfilled by any other transportation means. It's like saying we can go on a train everywhere. No, sometimes you take a plane. We can cross the Atlantic on a boat. Again, it's a lot of work. Can do it. Not very practical. Might not be everyone's first choice. Similarly, business aviation is not for every flight. Business aviation is for special flights between cities that cannot connect, flights that cannot happen during a certain time of the day, right? So it's a marginal product. It's a very, very small percentage of the world of aviation and even less than the world of travel. So let's start from the fact that it is a niche product with a high price, which also makes it into a niche, offers it to a very niche customer base. So it's very visible as an item, so it has been portrayed as a much larger issue than in reality it is. This said, of course, everyone needs to take responsibility for their actions. So we as a company need to have a very clear approach into, yes, but what can we do now, right? While we realize that we might not be a big number versus cars or housing or other industries, we need to do our part, but there's no way around it. The main solutions we have found, well, the first one was analyzing the business model. We have less aircraft around because we are chartering and it's not privately owned. We reduce the empty legs or the repositioning flights because of the global business model. So, of course, we are a much more efficient way to fly private than most private aviation companies can offer. We have a system of repositioning that reduces the number of, also the length of the segments that we connect, etc. But the biggest innovation right now is SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel. It's basically second life to waste. You take oils, you take agricultural remains, etc., and they get reprocessed. Instead of going into a waste function, they get reprocessed to generate fuel from that. It's second life. So when you look at the full 360 CO2 production, you can save about 80% versus using traditional fuel that comes from a refinery. And for everything where we cannot reach, of course, we decided voluntarily, not following regulations, to offset all the rest that we cannot cover otherwise. Does that make it into a green product? No, obviously not. It's still a high impact product. It's still a product that needs to be used carefully and with consideration. We are investing in new technology. We're investing in hybrid aircraft research, etc. Unfortunately, that is a long way to go. So the decision was not to wait, accept the partial solutions that are today and start implementing those instead of waiting for the fairy dust to come and being able to transform everything.
So Matteo, we always ask our guests the same 4 questions in closure. The first is perhaps a slightly negatively framed question, but what most irritates you about our industry?
it's a small industry, and as such, it's difficult to have the speed or the impact that you would like, because the number of clients you are observing is very tiny. So having the guts to go out and do real innovation when you know that it will only apply to a certain number of clients, it is very high. It's not like the world of startups where you say, I'll find a client. The number of clients you're serving is so tiny that you need to be very, very careful where you place your investment into new ideas, etc. So, of course, that has reduced the speed of innovation into the industry. This said, when you get it right, you have the most amazing clients, and they are ready and ripe to come aboard.
So, Matteo, what sort of concerns you about the world we're leaving the next generation, something that is relevant to both of us?
I come from Italy, and Italy is it's a country of passion. It's a country of ideals, etc. And what I'm a little bit worried for the next generations is that this has been eroded a little bit. It's become very short-lived. Your intent, your purpose, if you want to use a buzzword, but the ideals you live by have kind of eroded a bit. And that is such a strong motivator to keep you in line with yourself and not make you doubt yourself and not make you lose yourself. You as a person are shaped by what you believe is right. And if right and wrong shift on a constant basis, day after day, not in a way that is because you're reanalyzing it, but simply because there's too much around you, or because it's not radicated enough inside you, you can get lost. So I'm a little bit worried. I think if I were born today, I would possibly struggle a little bit more with who am I? Why am I doing this? And finding my own why. And again, we're not talking about big purpose, missions and heroic actions. We're talking about literally recognizing yourself in the mirror in the morning, and you see it. You see it. It's increasing, this sense of being lost, and it's a little bit due to the different shape of the community, the different shape of the news you have in front, and the multiplication of efforts, which are not only an exchange of ideas, but tend to be commercial in nature as well.
And you can see it in the data. Half of Gen Z are anxious most of the time in the workplace. Now, the problem with that is not actually the workplace. Okay, yeah, fine. We get emails at 7. You can try and stop people answering emails after 6:15. That's not going to solve happiness. The workplace is a far more agreeable place than it was 30 years ago. I mean, I got castigated if I came into the office at 9:02, instead of 9 o'clock. Do you know what I mean? And which was most days until I eventually got fired. By living in these digital communities that are largely anonymous, we are stripping away that, the physiognomy, the body language, the energetic.
But again, when you go into your comfort zone, that is where you're less invested. That is where the relationship is not worth much. The dating world, where you can swipe, you're not putting anything in it. You can have another day tomorrow, and another day tomorrow, and another day tomorrow. Maybe that person was interesting on the 4th date, just not on the first one. Maybe it was not a good time, right? We give up too easily. And by giving up too easily, we don't conquer anything. We don't conquer anything. It's not ours. We don't make it ours. We have nothing inside.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think it'd be hard to refute that point. If you had to give up your job tomorrow, what would you do? Farmer?
Sing.
Operatic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like the Beach Boys?
No. Definitely more classic.
Okay.
It's a perfect craft. It's all about emotions. It takes so much discipline to do it right, etc. And at the same time, it's liberating. So it has that element of constrictions and hardness, but at the same time, it's totally elating at the end. So I think it's a good mix.
What's the thing that most excites you that's sort of kind of on the horizon?
Dinner?
Let's leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a joy.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Luxe. You can find us on socials at Matterreform, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLuxe. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterreform.com and chat to one of our consultants.